Okay, so we just said we were going to review Sif Nun one more time just to make sure that we are understanding the whole idea of a promissory note that does not have the name of the creditor. Mishapora mixas chovo. If a person paid back a portion of his debt, ve'ein hamal verotza lichtov hapiraon al hashtar chov, and the creditor, for whatever reason, does not want to record the partial payment on the original promissory note. Elarotza lichtov shovar, but he wants to write a receipt. So 30,000 of the 100,000 has been paid back. I'll give you a receipt that you paid me 30,000, and I'll hold on to the original note of 100,000. Or if the entire debt is being paid off, but the creditor says, unfortunately, I've lost the shtar chov, I've lost the note. Im nichtav b'shtar chov ne'emanus mefureshes lamalve kibez edim. So if the shtar chov simply has the signature of the creditor and the debtor, or really just the signature of the debtor, and the debtor basically says he trusts the creditor like two witnesses, and he commits himself to pay it back, even though it doesn't have two witnesses on it. Yichtov shofer b'chesimas yado v'lo be'edim. So then, when the creditor writes him a receipt, he should write him a receipt with his own signature that I've received this, but he should not use witnesses. Shekevin shamino kibez edim lomer shelo nifra ubez kameya shuv ein shofer be'edim moel lahakchisho. He says, because since the debtor believed the creditor to use the promissory note for collection, even without witnesses on it, there's no sort of receipt that will help to contradict that kind of promissory note. Meaning that if the creditor will find that promissory note and produce it, then even though witnesses record on the shover that they witnessed the payback, that's not good enough. You need the creditor's signature on the receipt to record that he accepted the payment. Because then you need the creditor's signature. But he says, so that's how you pay back a debt when the creditor loses the promissory note. But that's assuming that the creditor's name is on the promissory note. And that's why he says, Bamedvar Mamurim Bishtar Chov, and this was the part that we wanted really to get to. Bishtar Chov Shekasuv Bo Shem Hamalva. That's only true that you should pay back a debt without getting the original promissory note when the name of the creditor is recorded on the note. Avalim ein kasuf bo shem hamalva klal. But if the collection note just says pay to the bearer $100,000, okay, then the nischayev haloive lechol mi shemotzi shtar chov zeh kemi shenogim achshav. He says then it turns out that whoever bears the note can go to the debtor and demand payment. So ein shover b'chasimas yad hamal v'moel alav. So in that kind of scenario, just having the creditor sign off saying that he was paid in full is insufficient, because im yotzienu acher v'yomer kanisi mehamalva, because someone else may produce that note and say, I didn't know that it was paid back. I paid 90 cents on the dollar for this promissory note, assuming that I would collect $90,000. And v'lo yadati shenifra, and I didn't know that it was paid. So therefore, just having a receipt with the creditor's signature says paid in full, signed, Ruvain, is not going to help, because there was no coal, there's no public display of a payback, since there's no witnesses. So therefore, in that kind of scenario, you would need to have a payback done in the presence of witnesses, and the witnesses would have to sign that everything was paid in full. because once witnesses are involved, it becomes more of a public spectacle. It becomes something that people will be able to discover and trace down, and therefore a person will do his due diligence before purchasing a promissory note. He'll say, how do I know it hasn't been paid back? And he'll go in the shul of the shtetl and he'll clap on the bima. Does anyone know Ruvain? He wants to sell me a note. Does anyone know if the debt has been paid back on that note from Shimon? And then people will say, yeah, we know Shimon paid it back. And then he'll know that he should not purchase the note. And that's why we get into the halacha that we learned yesterday, that the minhag has become that if anyone loses a promissory note, if a person is a creditor and he loses a promissory note, and the debtor acknowledges that he owes him the money, but the creditor is not named explicitly on the promissory note. Let's say it's a check made out to cash, which is basically a promissory note, right? And I wrote it. Shimon says I wrote a check made out to cash. I gave it to Ruvain. Ruvain claims that he lost it, but I know that I owe the money to Ruvain. So how do we resolve it? So and Shimon says I don't want to pay the money to Ruvain, or I don't want him to I don't want him to say, well, since I wrote him the check, I should just give him cash instead. I don't want to do that, because who knows, maybe someone else will find the check made out to cash and he'll produce it and he'll go to my bank account and demand payment. So then in that kind of situation, what we learned yesterday, they should make a public announcement that there was a promissory note that Shimon wrote. It was in the amount of $100,000. Uzmano kach v'kach. The date on the note was February the 1st. The hachasum ploni ben ploni, and the person who signed it, meaning Shimon, the debtor, signed his name. Ve'edei hakiyum ploni ben ploni u'ploni ben ploni, and it had witnesses on it as well. So mishi yesh lo shtar chov kazeh yovel beis din miyad. If anyone finds such a note, he should immediately bring it to beis din. Bimlo yavo yavatlo habeis din hashar shtar chov. And if anyone does not, and if you don't come within the next 3 days, let's say, the beis din will nullify the collectability of this note. V'yitnu kasuv v'chasum lahachasum bo. And then the beis din will give a writ of sort of cancellation to the debtor, basically telling him if anyone produces this note, it's like basically the beis din cancels the check. Is essentially what is being described over here. The od nahagu she'ein adam rashai liknos shtar chov kazeh ad sheyishal behachasim bo. And the minhag also is that no one purchases a promissory note that does not have the name of the creditor written on it until he consults with the debtor and asks him, is this note, someone is trying to sell me this note, this check made out to cash, signed by you, is this check still good? Imhu parua. Has it been cashed already? Has it been paid back already? Reuven wants to sell me this promissory note. I just want to make sure you didn't pay him back and he's just holding on to it. And as we learned before, right? If, let's say, Shimon, the debtor on the note, is not available, is not in town, then a person should feel comfortable purchasing it because, and what's the fear? That it's already been paid back? Well, if it was paid back with witnesses, as we said you're supposed to do on a note like this, that's something that you'd be able to trace down at least the witnesses. People in the community would remember and they would inform you. So you'd have to do your due diligence. So essentially what the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying is that if you want to purchase a note, a promissory note, a check made out to cash, and it's in Shimon's name, it's on Shimon's account. So what you should do is first consult with Shimon, tell him I have this opportunity. If you can't track down Shimon for whatever reason, in today's world, that probably would not be an issue because you could always reach someone by phone. But if for whatever reason Shimon is unavailable, then do your due diligence and ask around to find out if the debt has been paid back. If no one has heard about the debt being paid back, so then you can rely on the fact that it hasn't, and you should feel comfortable going ahead and purchasing it. Okay. So that's what we saw yesterday, and right, and this is all when the name of the creditor is not listed. Okay, so now we're up to date. Okay, everybody. So now let's look at Sif Nun Beis. V'chol shovar bein be'edim bein b'chasimas yad. Tzorech lichtov bo shahapiraon hu al shtar chov shesikumo kach v'kach. He says, anytime a creditor presents a receipt to the debtor, instead of giving him back the original promissory note, he instead gives him back a receipt, regardless of whether it has witnesses or whether it has the signature of the creditor on it. You have to also write on this receipt Shahapiraonhu, that the payment was made al shtar chov shesikumo kach v'kach, that I hereby present to Shimon a receipt received from Shimon on such and such a date, payment of such and such for an original loan that was for such and such. Kidei shelo yuchal liton shahashover hu al chov acher v'tol lo tvisa sheyitvos mishel halova. And this needs to be done in order that the creditor would not have the ability to say, oh, well, that was payment for a different debt. In other words, we have to protect the debtor because maybe the creditor will produce the original promissory note since he's giving him a receipt and not giving him back the original note. And he'll take it to court and say he wants to collect from it. Well, the debtor will produce the receipt, but if it's not specific, if there's not enough explicit information on the receipt, the creditor can say, of course, I gave him a receipt, but that was for the loan that he took out last year. Subsequent to that, I gave him another loan, and this is my promissory note on the second loan. So that's the reason why you have to write explicit information on the receipt. It has to be that you have to write the amount, and im zochrin zman kasivas ashtar yichtavu gamken al ashtar chov shezmanu kach v'kach. And that's why if everyone remembers when the loan was made, you should write that this is received such and such amount from Shimon for a loan that was made on such and such a date, if everyone remembers. And if we don't remember, we'll cover that in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. So have a wonderful day, a good Chodesh, and Mirz Hashem.